All right.
All right. Thank you for being patient. I appreciate you.
No, you're fine. I'm not, like I said, I'm not streaming right now.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I don't, yeah, I stream very late at night. Like my normal stream,
really?
I start,
Okay.
well, I mean, not really early. I start at 7, but try and capture that East Coast and West Coast, you know?
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, a lot of my people are international, so it's best to stream when they can like be here in the evening. All right, friends, welcome back to the stream. Thank you for being patient with us. We just got the sound up and running. If you have never seen Fabian Liberty before, Fabian is a self-proclaimed libertarian politics streamer, one of the biggest, if not the biggest libertarian politics streamer on Twitch. Would you like to give a little bit more information for our audience, Fabian? Also known as Scott.
Yeah, so I am yeah, I'm the biggest libertarian in Twitch politics, but like that's a very low bar considering I'm basically the only one. There's something about conservatives and libertarians in Twitch that they're like, the TOS is bad, so I'm not going to follow it. And it's like, okay, well, you're going to get banned. Like, I get that it's bad, but like, you're going to get banned. So it's a predominantly left wing dominated space. But yeah, Mark and I are Fabian Liberty. I do a lot of the talks and, you know, debates and stuff, and he's my co-host. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it, really, honestly. Like, you know, we do debates, we do news, we do politics, we do a lot of philosophy and theory and stuff. You know, we don't focus so much on like the drama or, you know, like the news of the day. Like I will get into the news of the day if it's funny and stuff like that. But for the most part, you know, a lot of times, you know, like I find most of the new, like the daily news to be like kind of a distraction. So like it'll be fun, but I try and do like kind of like a meta or theoretical kind of approach to everything. I don't know, it's fun.
Yeah, I mean that's.
And we do a lot of interviews.
We do over here. Yeah, you do a lot of interviews.
Yeah, I mean, like if you're not a libertarian, you might not have heard of people like that, right? But like, you know, I interviewed like Yaron Brook and who's the head of the Ayn Rand Institute, and like Stefan Kinsella, and LPNH is Jeremy Kaufman, and I don't know, a bunch of other people. Walter Block. We've talked to Walter Block a couple times.
Oh, cool. I find objectivism in general to be pretty frustrating because it just looks like subjectivism to me. It looks like individual subjectivism. So I haven't talked about it a lot, but we did a couple Ayn Rand streams a while back.
I mean, I like objectivists, but they're my kind of asshole. And no one can say that they've ever met an objectivist that wasn't an asshole, right? And so like I feel like that's probably the worst thing about objectivism is you're like, I want to learn about objectivism. You go online, you'll read some books, but if you talk to anybody, they'll be like, you are a child that does not understand the philosophical war. You are a child playing in the play box talking. And it's like, Jesus, fuck, man. I just had questions.
Fuck.
They're very mean people. Sorry.
Do you have like, well, it's okay. So I understand that libertarianism is not necessarily always a moralistic or even like, well, we'll just say moralistic. It's not really always something that people use to transition their whole lives into. So do you have a personal philosophy that you generally go by? Is it something that someone else already came up with, or do you have like a particular philosopher that you really go for?
Yeah, so I if I'm being totally honest, like, so libertarianism is a descriptive philosophy. It's a half a philosophy, really. And because it doesn't have moral prescriptions for the world, right? Like Marxism has moral prescriptions of how the world ought to be, right? Like that's a full philosophy. Stupid, but a full one. You know, like Christianity tells you how to act in the world. I'm kind of a mishmash of a bunch of different things, right? I try and use logic. I try and, you know, do the best I can. I would say when I'm at a complete loss, I tend to be some weird mixture of objectivism in terms of like what it is that I value and occasional virtue ethics. Like I don't really buy into the self-sacrifice positions of virtue ethics. But like if I'm totally at a loss and I don't understand a situation, I find myself being like, what are the things that I value in terms of in terms of virtues? Like am I being brave? Am I being bold?
Yeah.
Am I being honest? Am I being kind? And if I'm not being any of those things, I'm probably being a shitty person.
Oh, okay. Well, and we also know, me and chat, that virtue is not always necessarily used as something to define just general good moralistic qualities, right? Like virtue can also be a word that describes what something is meant to do and how well it does it. So like the
Mm.
virtue of a knife is its sharpness kind of thing. Um so would you consider those things to be how you want to act as a person, what is best to do and to be as a person, honesty and integrity and all those generally
Yeah, well,
moralistic
I
values.
mean, yeah, like what I would say is like the first thing I do is go, is this ethically justifiable via natural law, right? If there is anything that invalidates it for as like aggression or something in the libertarian philosophy grounded in argumentation ethics, right? Um, then it's ethically unjustifiable, which means it can't be evaluated for morality. So, attempting to justify something that goes against the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity from a logical standpoint, um, automatically makes it like a meta evil, right? Because it's not just that you're trying to justify one evil, but you're attempting to justify evil in and of itself. You're saying I'm an animal that foregoes logic. I can't be trusted. I am the snake of all snakes, if you will. But once we're in the category of like what is potentially justifiable, right? Like OnlyFans girls, for example, right? The libertarian position is everything they're doing is voluntary. Every transaction is voluntary. Everything's good to go. It's in the domain of what can be evaluated for morality. But my personal position on an OnlyFans girl is, a consequentialist analysis of the outcomes is not outcomes we want, right? You know, she for the very small portion of people, it might be good. So it's not really something I can take an objectivist framework and say anything other say that it's anti-life because Amaranth, abuse aside, is probably doing pretty well in her life as an OnlyFans girl, right?
Oh
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like it's probably worked out for her. I mean, maybe not because maybe it really is a golden rule that every OnlyFans girl is just damaging herself further. But for the majority of those people, we know that the girl is not likely to have a happy family. It's not likely to have a good marriage. Has probably ruined her chances of having those things. And we know it's not necessarily good for the consumer or society to be like wasting your money on a buying a pseudo girlfriend experience, right? And just becoming more and more misogynistic and broke. You know what I mean? Like so like I look at that and I go, okay, I can look at it from almost a consequentialist position, even though I hate on consequentialists, um, because it's in the domain of what can be looked at morally, right? And then, of course, and so like I kind of use a bunch of different things and kind of my own subjective feelings to kind of suss out my moral preferences. I wish I could come here and say like, oh, I have a full philosophy. Here's my book. Read it. This is the truth and the light and the way. But like I don't. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
that's the honest truth.
Absolutely. I have problems with that particular issue as well because I generally am a at least when we're talking about like spirituality and how I move around in the world, I practice what Eckhart Tolle calls awareness. And that's something that people generally take years and years and years of their life to unlock in themselves, that silence and moving about the world in silence. The Buddha
Mm.
said, empty of self. But what he really meant was full of everything else, full of your surroundings. And so it's really difficult for me to kind of translate that to people in a quick and easy way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, like, the best you can do is be like, I don't know, man, try the raisin experiment is probably the best way to do it. You know the raisin experiment from mindfulness-based
No, I
cognitive
don't.
therapy?
Enlighten me.
So you can kind of like, you can kind of via experience understand the concept of like awareness or being present with this. And it's a technique from MBCT that's very often used like PTSD patients and shit like that. So
Mhm.
what you do is you take a raisin and like you grab a notebook. It's super simple. You can do this with your kids, right? Like you
Mm.
take a piece of paper, right? And you get a timer, and for 5 minutes, you do not allow yourself to do anything other than just observe the raisin and write down
Okay.
everything you think. And then after the 5 minutes is up, write down everything you know about the raisin, the wrinkles, the things you counted, the way you felt, the colors of the raisin. And then you repeat the same thing by putting it in your mouth without eating the raisin, right? You feel the ridges, you taste the flavor, you feel what the flavor feels like in different parts of your tongue. You do all of this, right? And you copy this experiment a few times and then recognize that this is when anxiety steeps in or depression or confusion occurs, maybe take this concept to the world, right? This full experience of everything that is going around you, all of your everything, and kind of quieting that, all of those, like, you know, those quick kind of
Those
I don't know, like,
quirky little
yeah, the
running
natural
narratives in your head.
ADHD of us all, right? All
Yeah.
the distractions. Yeah. And it's like, if you
Yeah, the
experience
running
that, it's like, okay, now imagine that you took that thought, that philosophy to everything you do in the world. And then you can kind of explain it that way. I don't know. That would be my best guess.
Yeah, that's a good little experiment actually. I'd never heard of that. Um, Keto Kenny, are we going to be able to ask questions because they got to go do something? Well, Keto Kenny, ask your questions. You guys, if you have questions, I highly suggest that you either at me in your questions or highlight your message with your channel points. That would be the best way for me to pick them out. What are your thoughts on Libertarian Ricky Dale Harrington Jr., Mr. Scott? Is our first question from the audience.
I,
Have you heard of that person?
I don't know who that is. Yeah.
You don't even know who that is. Okay, so first question out the window.
I'm
Next
sorry. I
motherfucker.
don't know who's Ricky Dale Harrington. My co-host might know. You know who Ricky
Oh,
Dale
maybe.
Harrington Jr. is? Okay, my co-host also doesn't know.
Damn, Keto Kenny just blowing it out of the water.
Yeah,
Ran
I'm
for
sorry.
election for governor of Arkansas. Lost the election in November 8th, 2022. Well, damn.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, as much as I'm a political channel, like a lot of the stuff I do is theory and meta. So like sometimes I'm not like, you know,
Yeah,
like a Dylan Burns. It's like tracking the daily news and everything happening every day. So like sometimes I just
absolutely.
like for, and especially as a libertarian, last election, I supported one candidate, Blake Masters in Arizona. That was pretty much it. I wanted Blake Masters to win. I didn't give a fuck who won out of the Democrats or the Republicans, like pretty much everywhere else.
There we go. Yeah. I do you generally like vote Republican since there's not a lot of libertarian politicians out there?
I vote for anybody that I believe will reduce the size and scope of the state. So currently that tends to be Republicans. Or if I do vote, right? Like if neither candidate looks to me like they'll actually reduce the state, then I'm not gonna fuck. I don't vote for the lesser of two evils, right? Um,
Yeah.
the way that I put it this way, and I usually use this for leftists because that's usually who I'm talking to on in Twitch politics, right? But it's like,
Mhm.
imagine Bernie Sanders runs, right, and he's ready to abolish privatized healthcare. He wants to bring in socialized medicine. You support that, right? It's like you love that, and he has a giant blue wave of like progressives, and then you get socialized healthcare and the abolishment of all private insurance industries in health insurance, right? Well, what happens when the Republicans 8 years later have the exact same red wave? And instead of being like, let's go back to the old way of private insurance companies, which, you know, once the government gets power, it doesn't matter which party it is, they usually don't give it up. Instead,
Yeah.
they decide that what they want to do is they want to make transgender medicine just illegal across the board, and no one can get hormone replacement therapy, no matter what age they are, in anywhere in the United States. So my question is, when you voted for Bernie Sanders, why was it that you believe trans people don't have human rights? Because that's essentially what you're doing when you vote to give the state more power.
Yeah, you're essentially putting it in the hands of not just the people that you vote for, but everyone else who's in a position to have that same power. And people do forget that.
Right. And so it's like
difficult to
yeah. So I'll vote for a Republican if I think that, like, if their track record and what they're campaigning for leads me to believe that they'll reduce the power of the state. So I voted for Governor Glenn Youngkin in the Virginia gubernatorial election, right?
Okay.
Did I think he would stop critical race theory in schools? No. I mean, was it cool that he campaigned for that? Sure. I don't trust Republicans to know what the fuck is going on in schools because, you know, they're all happy with, you know, Portrait of a Graduate and have no idea that that's just rebranded SEL. And half of them don't know that SEL is just rebranded critical theory. You know, like they're too far behind. Most Republican, you know, politicians are too fucking stupid to understand the problem. But he also campaigned hardcore to get rid of grocery store food tax, 1.5% tax on all groceries. And in January, he kept his promise. We abolished grocery store taxes in the state of Virginia. So to me, that's a win. You know what I mean? Like, little that it is. So yeah, that's how I tend to vote.
I had a theoretical question for you actually that I was thinking about before the stream started. So you're a person who wants to abolish all taxes, correct? If you had your ideal world.
Well, all involuntary taxes.
Okay, that's a good addendum to that actually. So if people want to contribute to the state, if they want to contribute, they can.
Well, I wouldn't say if they want to contribute to the state, because the state's existence is unjustifiable from my position. But if people want to live in a covenant community, right, where they all sign a contract that says, like, hey, I'm going to buy land here, and everyone that buys land here agrees to these set of rules, and we don't sell you land in this area unless you agree to these set of rules, and those rules include something that is like a micro state, if you will. Like the left-wing anarchists will flip shit and be like, you just recreated the state. I don't care, because it's not, to me, so long as it's voluntary, everyone chooses to abide by that, and they feel that that's like a better system. Like, let them do that. There's no imposition against the free will of man to voluntarily sign contracts that say you're going to give up 10% of your assets to, you know, support certain institutions that you believe are beneficial to you.
Yeah. And then under that system, when new people are born who didn't necessarily, you know, fall into the camp of people who voluntarily went for that thing, they can move off, or they can, you know, stay there if they want to and continue to pay taxes.
You mad about the library, bro? Let me get some bisexual lighting for you, since you're so mad about the library. All right.
Oh, Murdercom. Hey, what's up? Yeah, that's sexy. There we go.
There you go.
So there are generally two types of libertarians, and I feel like you fall into one of these types. There are libertarians who believe in some amount of government oversight, and then there are libertarians who believe more, I guess, a little bit more moralistically, that all forms of involuntary servitude or involuntary power are against your creed, essentially. Would that kind of be the one that you sit in?
So I would say that this is a false dichotomy. This is not a false dichotomy. What I would say is there are libertarians, and then there are people who call themselves libertarians that aren't. They're libertine. They're in the liberty movement. And I think the biggest problem is the Libertarian Party being called the Libertarian Party, right? Nobody really has there's no philosophical movement called Republicanism or Democratism, right? There are progressives, there are, you know, neoliberals, there are anarchists, you know, ANCOMs. There's a coalition of people that vote Democrat, and there's a coalition of, tradcons, conservatives, limited government, corporatists that vote Republican, right? A lot of people, it's like, oh, I'm a libertarian, but I believe the state should be a night watchman state. It's like, okay, so you don't believe in the philosophy called libertarianism that was set out by Murray Rothbard and improved upon by other people. So it's like, I wouldn't really call those people libertarian. They get super pissed off when I say that. And they're like, fuck you, you're gatekeeping. And it's like, yeah, I'm gatekeeping a philosophy. Like, if you're going to call yourself, if you're going to say that you promulgate and believe in a philosophy, and then you say things that are counter, like that counter and are in conflict with the philosophy that you presume to be promulgating, like, then yeah, I'm going to call you out for that. So I would say those are people that are limited government, paleo libertarians, minarchists, right? That are a part of the liberty movement, vote libertarian, but unfortunately, in my opinion, and people can call me an asshole, but this is just true, they're not libertarians, and there's not enough gatekeeping. Get mad, bro.
Gatekeeping can be a good thing. Hot take, yes. Not that hot of a take around here. We gatekeep all the time. So Milton Friedman, who wants something like the FDA to be abolished, but also wants the government to be able to have the power of the judicial system. That would be something that you would be like, you're not a real libertarian, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, as cringe as it is to say that Milton Friedman's not a real libertarian, right? He's a Chicago school in terms of forms of economics. He's not necessarily fully Austrian, which is kind of a basis. Praxeology is kind of a basis of libertarian thought. And he doesn't believe in the non-aggression principle followed to its logical conclusion. So it's like, I don't know how you could say that's a libertarian. The problem is like, well, what the fuck do we call him then? Because certainly not a paleo-lib or a Republican or a Democrat, right? And we have a party called the Libertarian Party, and that's obviously the party that Milton Friedman would support, right? Like, he wouldn't support fucking Republicans, so it's like, it's kind of, they're, we're in a place right now where all of the leaders in the liberty movement don't know what to call it. And the best I can say right now that people have come across is the word libertine, which is they're very libertarian-like in their thinking, but they haven't fully promulgated the philosophy to its natural conclusion.
It sounds like the half sugar version, the Splenda version.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, just drink unsweetened tea. Like, we used to have a joke, and I still tell it occasionally, but it was more in the beginning. It's like, what's the difference between a minarchist and a anarcho-capitalist?
What is the difference?
6 months.
Jesus.
Well, it's like, if you're really reading a bunch of libertarian philosophy and you're a minarchist, like, and you're just going to be an ANCAP eventually, or you're going to abandon libertarianism. Like, those are pretty much, but staying a minarchist, the more you read and experience the arguments and things like that, is just not really possible.
Yeah. And tell me what your background is, dude, because you're obviously very well educated on this particular area and on philosophy and things like that. Did you go to school for philosophy? Is it more of a hobby?
Philosophy, I mean, I took a couple of classes in undergrad in philosophy, but it's more of a hobby of mine. So amateur philosopher, if you will. I wouldn't even really call myself a philosopher because I'm a talking head. But no, I went to I mean, TLDR, I was in a very politically motivated family. I was a socialist. Not full-blown communist, but basically the same. Slowly became libertarian. Went into the army, became more libertarian, a little bit more conservative in some of my views. Then I went to school and double majored in sociology and psychology in undergrad, and went to grad school for counseling. And I thought I was going to be doing a lot of psychology and like things like that, but it just ended up being more politics and philosophy than it did psychology, and I'm okay with it. Sometimes you have to follow your audience and what it is that they want. But yeah, my actual like area of expertise is probably, well, honestly, at this point is probably, libertarian philosophy. But what I studied in grad school is counseling.
Okay, yeah. And by the way, thank you for that because we need more people to be in that particular arena. We need more social workers, we need more counselors, you know.
Well, COVID happened, and and then my relationship with my significant other and mother of my children kind of fell apart. And then I didn't finish. I never finished grad school. I did all the prereqs, and then it was time to do my internship. And I couldn't afford like 6 to 9 months of unpaid internship now that I was like single and by myself and had child support. And and so I worked for the census as a census field supervisor for multiple missions in the post enumeration survey. And then after that I became a Twitch streamer. It's a weird life.
So having worked in the census, you're probably, what's up?
No, I just saw someone in chat say he didn't get along with his wife's boyfriend. I just thought it was funny.
God damn it. Yeah, so having worked in the census, you've probably seen some of the changes that have been made. Like, at some point, I think we're going to be more effectively counting out LGBT people, things like that. And I know that probably just makes people's lives
What do you mean?
harder, but I also
What do you mean counting out LGBT? I'm confused.
Like enumerating, like registering whether or not someone identifies as an LGBT person.
Yeah, I hope not. I really hope not. That would, because like my biggest fear. So I'm a lot of what I do is culture war stuff as a libertarian, believe it or not. Because I hate Marxism and I hate critical theory. And I do believe we're in a philosophical war. And I do believe that most of the conservatives are kind of like knee-jerk reacting to the shit that's going on in schools and have no idea what's going on. Like they just have no idea what transformative social emotional learning is, and like the way that our education system, like most of them have no idea that Second Step is like a Marxist supporting organization that uses psychological interventions on your children to turn them into leftist agitators, and they brag that they're in 34% of all elementary schools alone, just them in the United States. So I do a lot of culture war stuff. And I did a panel. I hosted a panel with was it Buck Angel, Taftash, Blair White, Richie, or also known as Tulip R, Sinead from Genuspect, I can never remember the organization, Chloe Cole, etc. And we talked about it. I think I pissed off Blair White because I was like, yeah, my biggest fear is that the knee-jerk reaction from the Republicans will be just to destroy it all. Like it'll just be like, look, I don't know what's going on, but you're a bunch of fucking Marxists and you're fucking up my kids, and like and so all of you can burn, right? And so like I worry. So the idea that like the census will start tracking people's fucking sexual identity and gender identity, to me would be terrifying, that the government would have access to those records. And like the idea that like if the culture swings far enough, kind of to borrow a Marxist term, reactionary right, like what that could mean from a policy perspective, like is terrifying to me.
Absolutely. I can see that standpoint. And the idea that that information can somehow be used against you obviously is the main issue, but it's also this idea that we are essentially an LGBT person or a straight person, that we are essentially something of that nature. Yeah, it brings to mind like the kinds of things that really do separate us on a phenomenological level.
Yeah, but I mean the funny thing is that like, I mean, like if you read queer theory though, like that's the exact opposite of the claims of queer theorists, right? Like David Halperin's, queerness is an identity without an essence, right? So I mean, queer theorists, in academia, like the kind of the intelligentsia that put forward the philosophy that gets promulgated by the activists, at a lower level. And most of those activists don't understand the theory they're touting, right? Like it's it's intrinsically gender and sexuality like abolitionist, right? So like I don't know. I don't know if we're necessarily headed in that direction, because in terms of the census thing, because I don't think the philosophy speaks through people, right? And it's kind of like like Carl Jung said, like, people have ideas. People don't have ideas. Ideas have people. So I don't know that that's probably to happen, because it's not necessarily what the theory itself promulgates. Like if we go deeper into critical theory and queer theory as a culture, then we'll get more gender and sexuality abolitionist and less specific with the categories that we choose to use, and more kind of like people just calling themselves queer and not labeling like themselves as gay or lesbian or trans or non-binary.
Yeah, that's actually what I do in my daily life. Like I'm a few of these categories, so I'm just going to use the umbrella term queer. People seem to react pretty well to it, even on the right. Because I'm not forcing any pronouns on people. I'm not, making this my entire fucking identity. I just know that I'm queer. And if you're my friend, you know that. And if you're, someone who knows anything about me, it's just something that you can point to and say, "Oh, Johnny knows something about this,"
Yeah, I mean, like I hate the term queer because of the connotation and the philosophy that it helps normalize. But like in terms of like your general thought, like I don't obviously find anything wrong with that. Like if I was like queer or whatever, I would use a different word. But that's just me personally.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is, I am an abolitionist of gender for myself. That's what I see as beneficial for myself. And it has roots in a lot of different things, but primarily that spirituality aspect that we talked about before, wherein
Mm.
I'm pretty much silent on the inside. That's been my experience for about 7 years now, since I've been in recovery. And I also, however, appreciate and know that the roles of gender are highly important for society and for individual people. And so
Yeah.
just because I live this way doesn't mean that it's not an important indicator for other people in their lives.
Yeah, so I get a lot of flack because like, because I do a lot of culture war stuff, and then the TERFs get really pissed off at me from time to time. Because like I don't buy their definition of like man and woman as like,
Yeah.
adult human male, adult human female. And I pissed off Eva from fucking Gays Against Groomers the other day, and she was like, "Fuck you, ratio," and I was just like, nah, God damn it, like you don't get that like your ideology helped bring about what we have today. Like you got to abandon this feminist bullshit, right? That like sex stereotypes are evil and society shouldn't have gender roles. It's like, yeah, I mean, like gender roles can be harmful, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like
Hmm.
societies construct a general idea of how people should act, and then we socialize people into those modes of behavior. And as society changes, what those modes of behavior are, change as well. You know what I mean? If it was the 1800s, it'd be really weird to see a female in high heels and pretty common to see a man in high heels, right?
Hmm.
And so like, the definition that I tend to use is, like the socially constructed role inherent to the adult human female, or inherent to the adult human male, right? Because what is it describing, right? Like what is masculinity? Well, it's describing a role constructed around that itself is describing the adult human male. And so I think
Yeah.
both sides have a philosophy that has holes in it, but because they don't like the other side, they're unwilling to take any elements from the other side's philosophy that may be true, right? Like many of the conservatives and the TERFs are like, socially constructed, that's a red flag, that's evil Marxism. And it's like, well, not really. And it's like gender roles, John Money invented that and he tortured kids, therefore bad. And it's like, okay, fair, but also like gender roles exist, right? Like you see them in the
Yeah.
world, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not gender theory, you know, like this crazy leftist thing. Like it's just the development of sociology is something that is new, and we now have words to describe these abstract ideas that we likely had all along.
Yes. And I like the way that you qualify that. Like the idea of this is a role that describes a general type of person. And people are genuinely born into that general type of personhood every single day. Just because some of us don't fit in that little niche or the other niche doesn't mean that they don't exist as niches.
Well, I'd say it's like, it's more of like, I mean, I think we're obviously socialized into these roles, you know? But there's certain things that like, it's all probability, right? You know, it's all distribution. You know what I mean? So like if you're talking about like, you know, tenderness, right? Towards children, right? Like the distribution is going to be shifted for females, right? To be more tender and caring towards children for a whole host of reasons, both biological and socially constructed, right? But obviously when you shift a distribution, that doesn't mean that, you know, one or two standard deviations away from the, you know, away from the mean is going to be, you know, like it is going to somehow like mean that you're still in this black and white category, right? But the thing is like once you start doing a Bayesian inference of like multiple different traits, right? Like you're going to see a grouping and then you're going to see some outliers. And like, and I think it's important that we kind of recognize that like, yes, some women dress like tomboys. And then there's going to be some behaviors that they represent that like puts them obviously in the category of woman. Whereas a transgender person, I don't necessarily think belongs in either category because they're playing a different role, you know, and I don't want to really get into autogynephilia or anything like that too deep because Twitch TOS, right? I don't want to like, you know, if we go too far into that, you might get banned. But like, you know, they're playing a different role, but they're also denying the very category willfully that you're attempting to put them in whilst doing everything in their power to not fit in that category. And at a certain point, like it kind of falls apart that they're in that category.
Do you see society as something that can be molded in a way that makes these categories less restrictive? Or do you find more that we're kind of already in the most modern and up to date of times that you don't see a lot of change happening? Because when I talk to like queer
I don't know if that's
people,
good or
when I talk
bad.
to LGBT people, they say that they see the next 10 years as like this is going to be revolutionary and we're going to abolish gender or we're going to like make trans people completely acceptable in the next 10-20 years. Society is moldable, and I more so see what we're talking about, a sort of natural enlightened center, if you will, um as
Well,
as the more preferable option, and it's not very different from what we have now.
so the first thing I would say is that there's always unintended consequences to any goal that you put forward in reality, right? You know, I mean, like libertarians love to talk about it when it comes to government all the time, right? But you know, like a quick example, last year, right? The FDA decided to add sesame seeds to the food allergen list, right? Because there's a growing number of people that are allergic to sesame seeds. And most people look at that and they go, good, right? People are allergic, like it should be added to the regulations of the food allergen list. Like this is a positive thing, right? But then comes the unintended consequences, which is that the regulation states that like you can't put on a package may contain something if it's on the food allergen list. You can't put on a package, something along the lines of like made in the same factory that has this thing once it's added to the food allergens list, right? Sorry, hold on. My music stopped. I had to rectify this. So because you can't do that, factories recognize that sesame seeds are really small. And so it's very easy that they might accidentally end up in a product that they don't intend for it to be in. So what they did instead is they started adding to crackers and a bunch of other things this year. A whole bunch of things have sesame seeds added into them that never had them, and it's an incredibly small amount, and it's listed as an ingredient. Therefore, they can't get fined or sued for accidentally having sesame seeds in it. So adding sesame seeds to the food allergen list made it to where a whole bunch of products that never used to have sesame seeds in them now have sesame seeds in them, and people that are allergic to sesame seeds have less food that they can eat. Right? So this is kind of like the iron law of like unintended consequences. When you attempt to set about changing society, right? You don't actually know what the future holds in that. So like while I like the idea of LGBT people being treated more equitably, right, in society, and people not really giving a like not imposing kind of like social norms onto men and women. You know what I mean? Like I kind of like the idea of like dudes no longer saying like, hey, you can't get that done. Like why don't you hit it with your purse? And like, inherently misogynistic or misandrist kind of like jokes and ideas and things like that. What are the consequences of a society that's gender abolitionist? I don't know. And they don't know either. And so, does it further lower the birth rates? Does it destroy families? Does it make social interactions less cohesive? Does it force people to, kind of self-identify with a bunch of layers and categories and knowledge in order to be able to engage in relationships with people? And what's the fallout from that? Nobody fucking knows, right? So this idea that like gender abolition is going to be this great and wonderful thing, I don't know that I necessarily buy that as a positive, even though I kind of like the idea of liberty, which is why I tend to err on the side of freedom of association, right? You call yourself whatever the fuck you want to call yourself. Do whatever the fuck you want, but don't impose that will via education onto parents' children's or via laws in some nature, right? I ought to be able to fire you if I don't like you. And that can include, I don't like gay people or I don't like black people, right? And while that's, we can look at that and go, that's fucked up. The conflict of imposing those things, again, has unintended consequences. I personally would rather know that a restaurant says no blacks allowed because I don't want to eat there. I don't want to support a racist with my money. And if I happen to be black or I'm dating a black girl at the time, which is often ladies, I don't want them to spit in her food or my food, right? Like I would rather just take my patronage elsewhere. But instead we impose these restrictions and then like racism goes away. It's like, no, it fucking doesn't. Like what occurs is more resentment in the racist and an emboldening of the idea that they're willing to speak truth to power and in their own echo chamber because they're kind of shunned to the side. And so I don't know. It's complicated. I don't know that there's a right answer.
I can already see at least one unintended consequence. And I think that that's more people of gender abolition in particular. I think that more people will become attached to online dating because they can pick and choose based on labels and based on people's identifications what kind of person they are and whether or not they're going to be sexually compatible or socially compatible. Because
Right.
if gender abolition happens and everyone is going around being purposefully perhaps as androgynous as possible, or you assume androgyny on the part of all people, then you have to rely on some amount of very clinical, very specific wording when you're interacting with people. Like, oh, are you AFAB? Do you have, and that's basically like code for what kind of genitals do you have? Am I going to be sexually attracted to you?
Right.
And I already see that happening. Um, and I don't think that it's good for socialization in general. People ought to be able to just go to a fucking bar and meet somebody, and not have to worry about whether or not their particular list of things is up to date or not, essentially.
I mean, online dating to me is a it's such a conundrum, right? Because in one way it's a labor saving device, which is good, right? I don't need to go out and have a ton of social interactions. I can, I can create a filtration system of the things that I prefer, and then take all of those preferences, bring it down to a smaller category, and then experiment within or smaller group, and experiment within that group and save time. But I mean, obviously, like the unintended consequences, again, right, have been hookup culture, and but it's like, is that the dating app's fault, or is that a liberalization of the way that we view sex in our society? Is that really the dating app's fault? Like, I know a lot of people love to hate on dating apps. It's an easy thing to be like, dating apps ruined all these things, right? But it's like, is it really? And then of course, dating apps are kind of a self-selecting mechanism. We pull so much data from them, and be like, the problem is that the type of people that are on dating apps tend to be people that are into hookup culture, tend to be people that are well, yeah, I mean, like, there's tend to be less involved in communities, right? Because obviously they're single people, but unless they're cheating or swingers or something. But you get what I'm saying, right? Like, there are a lot of like good girls and good guys that aren't on dating apps. What I would tell people, kind of cheekily, right, to avoid this and be a little less serious, if you're a guy, right, just ask a girl out, and if she says yes, take her to a Starbucks inside of a Barnes and Noble, buy her some coffee at Starbucks, and walk around Barnes and Noble, because you will be able to have every single conversation about marriage in one section, about what kind of nerdy shit they're in another section, about their politics in another section, and just hang out and chit chat at a bookstore while getting coffee. And if you don't like them at that point, you wasted like the price of a cup of coffee, and then move on. It's way better filtering than a dating app. Trust me, it's a great first date. Do
Dating advice, yeah. And I was on dating apps for so long. I met a lot of people, and I probably ended up having more like outside social interaction than I would have otherwise. But I ended up finding the person who's going to be my life partner because we were involved in a community together, because we were both in the music scene in our city, and we had known each other for 5 years and finally decided to hang out in a non-musical venue,
Right.
And so I go back and forth. I'm like, yeah, I met a lot of nice people, but in the end, community is the thing that got me my life partner.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book, Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. It's a must read. Now, of course, the book is kind of dated because it's mostly talking about Gen X and boomers, in comparing them, and because millennials are like children at the time that the book is written.
Yeah.
But it does a great job of describing like what happened from a sociological perspective, which is, to basically, I mean, the thesis of the book is our society and technology and neighborhoods have been constructed in such a way that has reduced social capital, right? We stopped going to little clubs and meetings. Women entered the labor market, which is fine, right? But there are unintended consequences of that, which is, there's no more blue ribbon societies. There's no more like book clubs in the neighborhood. There's no more like, oh, a new neighbor came in, so I baked them a casserole and like went and met their family, because that time isn't available anymore, right? And so you prioritize time for a career, which is fine. But again, it has those kind of consequences, and men stop going to like things like, men used to do a lot of things like, Freemason societies, or like wear funky little hats and go into a lodge, and it talks about how neighborhoods have changed, with the GI Bill and urbanization, and then the move from urbanization into the suburbs, and the way that we work in one community, we shop in another community, and we live in another community, right? And this is a totally new experiment as far as humans are concerned. Throughout most of human history, we shopped, worked, lived, and knew everybody within one area. And so it's like most people don't know their neighbors. They don't know anybody in the neighborhood unless they have kids and they happen to be in the same social function. I don't know. I don't really know where I was going. That was just kind of a tangent, but like definitely read Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. Great book.
Heard of Bowling Alone before. Yeah. I'm not surprised it's a little out of date because I've been hearing about it for a long time. It's probably something that involves a little bit of modern translation, but yeah, the book
Yeah.
suggestion is definitely solid.
I mean, he got a lot of predictions right, which is scary. Maybe not as good as like the, you know, the fourth grade turning or anything, but still, he got a lot right.
What is fourth grade turning?
Maybe somebody in chat knows the actual title of the book. That's just what pops up in my head. I can't remember the name of the book right now, but TLDR, a bunch of people in like the 80s and early 90s, economists, psychologists, etc. And this was kind of the wave in academia of like for whatever reason, the fourth turning, thank you. For whatever reason, you know, up until the 80s, we had like institutions were very separate. So psychologists didn't talk to sociologists that often. And economists didn't really talk to psychologists that often, right? And then in the 80s and 90s, we were like, these people should like come together, right? And then you have like kind of a revitalization of like behavioral economics, for example, right? And so a bunch of people got together and said, well, let's look at history, let's look at psychology, let's look at the economy and everything and see if we can find kind of a pattern and see if this pattern repeats, right? And so they hypothesized based off of the pattern of human history. And it's a really long book that basically says strong men create, you know, good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. And so they looked and they were like, basically every 100 years, you know, there's this cycle that repeats of like this, you know, summer, spring, spring, summer, winter, fall and winter. And we're in the winter portion and there's this turning, right? Where usually this is when world wars happen, civil wars happen, horrible calamities in human history or in giant changes. And then we kind of all come together and like a new wave of culture and society and progress or whatever emits. What they accurately predicted in the book, which is insane, is they were like, yeah, there's going to be a terrorist attack likely on financial institutions. It's probably going to be a plane and it's going to crash, and it's probably going to be a plane attack from terrorists. They predicted that we'd have like a great economic like problem. They thought it would be Social Security collapsing, not the housing market bubble. But still pretty good. They predicted that there would be racial tensions would spark up again, and that we would have political camps shift one side or the other because of racial issues that would get worse. That there would be massive riots centered around race, and that would cause further political division. And a couple of other things that like just were true. It was like so when you read the book at the time, you're like, whatever. But then you read it afterwards, and you're like, this is eerily accurate.
You're like, oh damn, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good book.
I was reading this book. I never did finish it, but I know it's on my shelf somewhere, and it was essentially a history of the world from the end of the Second World War up to the 1970s when the book was written. And it's just this microcosm of societal change, and I see so much of it reflected in the post 9/11 era. And it's truly baffling how people can insist that time is not a flat circle. No, time is definitely time is a flat circle, and
well, no,
if
but
we can prepare for new things in a way that makes sense with the time at hand, then I think that we would be a better society. Certainly, like I'm a big fan of China having a 400-year plan and shit like that, being prepared for shit.
Well, yeah, communists and authoritarians can hilariously enough, right? And this is the argument in a way kind of made by Democracy the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe, right? Is that like they act as a private property owner in a way, monarchists do, which is that they're in low time preference, right? Because politicians in liberal democracies, they're only there for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, right? Even if they make a career out of it, there's no guarantee. And so they're very high time preference, right? They're kind of like, how can I get rich? How can I get elected next election season? Whereas like dictators and monarchists, they have 100-year plan because they act more like a private property owner because they own the whole country, right? They do a lot of evil shit, obviously, and they impose a lot of things, and there's all kinds of horrible stuff. Obviously, anarchism's better, but like, yeah, you can have a long-term plan when you know that yourself and your family is going to be in charge of everything for a long period of time. And so, people like Putin or people like, individuals within the CCP that have a privileged status can plan ahead. Whereas like, Democrats and Republicans, they can't do it as much. They can
They
a
can
little bit
barely keep the
because
lights
they're a
on
mono
every
party.
election cycle. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
part of
and
it, yeah.
it's easy to forget, when you say that something is a good idea. Like I said, the 400-year plan is a good idea. It's easy to forget all of the insidious shit that goes on in order to make that plan happen. And so there's this, I think, trend toward wanting a more mono-party system, something where people actively, not even in the idealist world, it would be, oh, everybody works together. Everybody has this idea that if we can just come together, then everything's going to work out and we'll agree on shit. But in fact, the way that it happens in the real world is that people can come together and work on shit when they all are part of the same system and own the same thing and are part of essentially a dynasty.
I mean, sure. Yeah, sure. I don't know that I have a whole lot to say on that.
No, you kind of enumerated it like yourself.
Yeah, I mean,
but
if
I'm
people,
just kind of repeating
yeah,
it.
if I don't know that everybody can come together, but I don't know that I want everybody to come together, right? Like we look at like early Austria, and like the polycentric societies that existed at the time, the kind of like little micro states that existed, that's real multiculturalism. People think multiculturalism is forcing a bunch of different cultures in together and then having like a shared value system. And it's like, well, what is that? That's a shared culture. That's a monoculture with different skin tones and food, right? Like the way that you get multiculturalism is that people choose to associate freely with the people that they like or the people that are like them or share the same values and the same cultural things. And then they develop that culture further and independently, and then they trade peacefully with other cultures that are doing the same thing. So I would actually say that like my desire, if I had one, right, if I had to theorize one, is actually the exact opposite. I would rather have 1,000 societies that all differ in the way that they police themselves, the way that they govern themselves, police themselves, the food they eat, the dances they do, the social rituals that identify the in-group and the out-group, and then have some trade, some mixing, and some knowledge gained from the things that work and the things that don't work in all of these little social experiments. It's kind of the idea, watered down heavily with, a republic, a constitutional republic, well, a federation, if you will, of states, right? Is that like California is different from Florida, and like that's good that they don't necessarily have the same culture and the same rules because they have different weather and different people.
Yeah. And it sounds oddly like Native American to me. It sounds like all of the different ways that these tribal communities came together and met up because they were nomads, and they came into an understanding that okay, we're going to be here this part of the year and we're going to trade with you this part of the year, and if we want to do some cultural exchange, that's cool. um and I think smaller communities also lend
I
themselves
mean,
toward.
Native Americans were also super fucking violent.
They
Like,
were very, very
I
violent,
mean,
yes.
I mean, like,
There's-
I get what you're saying. Come
yeah,
together. Let's have a potluck, and those that have achieved a lot of success can, you know, give up some of their assets for the betterment of the community, and like tribes will have like temporary peace. But as soon as fucking resources get scarce, they start murdering each other real quick.
yeah, that's kind of why I said oddly, because I know that the Native Americans themselves did not get along every part of the year, but they had these cycles wherein they exchanged and were peaceful at times. And they had this. What I was going to say is that I think smaller communities lend themselves towards something that Western modern society especially is lacking, and that is the initiation ritual,
Mm.
especially around puberty. And that's something that would also be uh completely gotten rid of, in my view, if you were to have a completely androgynous, kick out all the gender norm society, is this idea that people come of age and they come together and they do some sort of ritual. I went through cotillion, like,
Mm.
small communities can do that. And when you have a giant metropolitan area, you're servicing any amount of club um or society that would come together and do that is so spread out and would be servicing thousands upon thousands of puberty age individuals in any given year.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's probably more so. If I had to guess, right? I don't fucking know, but if I had to guess, I would say it's probably more so a consequence of industrialization, right? Like
Mm.
Amelia Durkheim, has this concept of anomy, right? Which is kind of like a reinvented Marxian idea of like alienation from labor. Um, but not stupid because labor doesn't exist. But like the idea being that like, we used to live in these small communities, and in those small communities, men and women kind of like were grouped together and knew each other, and you knew the people in the community, right? Whereas, um, as we industrialized, not only did we have these population center increases, but we created the nuclear family, which is kind of a paltry, sad and pathetic excuse of a family. Um, and obviously even that is almost completely eroded in our current culture, which is why I tend to say we live in like a post-anime society. Like, but we stopped having grandma and uncle and auntie and all the neighborhood women going and doing things together, and all of like the village men going and doing things together, right? Instead we move into a city, and that city, and then we kind of like we have more and more niche ideas of our labor. So like, someone becomes like a machinist at a specific factory that's really good at this specific thing. Um, and so that has consequences. And so I don't know if it's so much that the initiation ritual is about the size of a society. I don't know. I think there's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah, and someone said that someone in the chat said that the initiation ritual has been essentially replaced by the education system. And to some extent, I would agree with that. We have all of
Mm.
these people going through a very standardized, almost ritualistic, sort of punishment process, wherein they have to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and go to this place and all congregate together.
Yeah, I mean, I would.
But
I mean, obvi-
they kind of
I mean,
like.
like we should abolish public schools. That's my position.
Yeah, I remember that from the Prime debate the other night. You said that
Mm-hmm.
public schools can be completely abolished and there would be no real consequences. how would you account for people who can't afford private schools? Like, would they just
Well,
homeschool their kids?
so the first thing I want to say is the idea that you can't afford to educate your children and you need public education is just a myth. It's just not true. Literally everyone can afford to homeschool or send their kids to private school. That's just a fact. There's nobody here that's priced out of homeschooling. And you say, well, I don't have time to spend, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week educating my kids. And it's like, well, nobody said that you have to in order to homeschool, right? Like you can very easily, well, not very easily, but if we didn't have public education, it would be very easy, right? The Mormons solved this like fucking 50 years ago, right? They have homeschool collectives, right? You work a 9-to-5 job 40 hours a week, which by the way, the average work week is 34 hours, right? So you work 40 hours a week, you work Monday, you don't work Tuesday, you work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then you work either Saturday or Sunday, okay? And on Tuesday, you take your kid and 5 other kids and you homeschool them, preferably in the thing that you're best, that your strongest suit. You're really good at math, you do math, right? And then on Wednesday, someone else takes off that day and they educate your kid, and you're involved in a local church or a local community, and you trust these people, right, with a group of your children. And they go, oh, well, I don't know that I could trust these people. What if they harm my kids? Well, public school teachers have the same rate of abuse as do Catholic priests, right? Like it's like, except they're strangers that you don't know and you only see at a fucking parent teacher conference, twice a year. So, I mean, like the idea that you just inherently trust school teachers, but you wouldn't trust someone that's a local, someone that's local in your community whose children you see once a week, right? Is kind of silly. Like the idea that the rates of your children are likely to be safer, better educated, and don't have to deal with any of the bullshit that comes along with public schools. And that's free. And, like I said, the average taxes that are taken out of people is, it's $4,000 per year per American working citizen, not including the labor participation rate, which is like 64% right now. I'm just taking like adult age people. It's about 4,000, right? Every school age child in America is the state spends somewhere between 11,000 at its lowest to 25,000 a school year. Now, imagine, right, for a second, if we just gave that money, right? And you lived in New York City and you had 3 school age children and you were given $75,000 a year. Think you could educate your kids? You know what I mean? Like it's a silly notion. Furthermore, a majority of that funding comes from property taxes, right? About a little under 2/3 of that money comes from property taxes. So if most of that money is coming from property taxes, that makes buying and owning a home more expensive, which disincentivizes the housing market, which means less houses get built, which means a reduced supply in housing, which means more expensive houses. Like, not only would abolishing public schools be easy, we would easily be able to cope so long as you got involved with your community and you'd have more money, but houses would be cheaper and there would be more houses. It would also simultaneously reduce some of the stress on homelessness and high rent. Like, it's just the government steals your money to give you a solution, and they talk about how wonderful it is, and they don't compare it to the nil hypothesis, which is that what if they didn't steal the money?
I noticed somebody up there. I think it was Aristopus. Aristopus is saying, please ask for evidence on this, Johnny. Stibis, if you could tell me like specifically what you want to be cited, then maybe we can ask our friend Scott for a little citation. But
citation on property. I mean, like honestly, just
no,
Google
I believe
it real
that
quick.
it was back.
I'm not trying to be like.
No, I think it was back when you were talking about the idea that everyone can afford to do this. I think that's around the time that Stippus put that in the chat.
Well, I mean, I explained how you can afford to do it, right? Yeah. Unless you're working 60 hours a week, you know what I mean? Like, then you can't have a day off. Sure. I mean, like I buy that, but I mean, like, if you're working 60 hours a week and you're still in poverty, something else is wrong. Right? Like something else is going on. I don't know. Maybe you
And
shouldn't have
they're,
kids if you can't afford to feed them and like have one day off a week.
I mean, yes, absolutely. You know, people talk about birth rates and shit like that, but I think that the decision to have children ought to be a much more deliberate thing than it seems to currently be. And just to steelman you a little bit, if we have more children in private school, then they won't have to charge as much for private school because you'll have more of a basis from which to draw the income that you need to run the school.
Uh,
Maybe.
private school would likely get more expensive and more efficient if I was to be fair, right?
Oh,
Um, because there would be more of a demand for it. There'd be more of a demand because most people don't want to homeschool their kids, right? And if demand goes up, price is going to go up. Um, like it'll
mm,
level out eventually, but like at least in the short term. And when I say short term, I mean time enough to found a company designed for a private school, expand, build an entire school, hire like that's 5 to 10 year plan for a lot of this, right? So price will probably go up if I'm being honest. Um, but yeah, but I mean, but we'll also have more money in the economy because there'd be less taxes. So there's that.
for taxes for
Um,
public school, you've already cited that 4K a year that people spend on taxes.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, like, like, we do have to recognize we live in a progressive tax system, right? So I mean, like, we're subsidizing lower income people. That 4,000 is an average, right? A millionaire is going to pay more in property taxes, for example, than someone that doesn't own a home. But if you don't own a home, you're renting, which means your landlord is paying the property taxes, which means part of the equation of your rent is paying that, right? So even when people are like, well, I rent, so I'm not really paying that, like everybody's paying it. It's just, obviously the millionaire is paying more in property taxes, but, the landlord's paying property taxes and he passed that cost down to you in the form of a higher rent because he has to make a profit.
Mm-hmm.
So I
They
mean, like
then
we'd
landlord.
all right. So I don't know that we'd all have more money. A lot of us rent, but we'd have cheaper rent. And so because we had cheaper rent, we would essentially have more money, right? Like if your rent goes down as if your property taxes, depending on some areas, let's say it's $3,000 a year for like or maybe like $2,000 a year for an apartment, right? Well, that's $2,000 a year that you have likely as the market balances out with in terms of lower rent.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Yeah, imagine if renting the place that I currently rent now was uh lessened by property taxes. It's already pretty cheap here in Louisiana. You know, I'm not entirely sure what our property taxes look like, but rent in Louisiana is pretty cheap. We tend to have a
Yeah,
pretty cheap
Louisiana is probably closer to
overall.
that 11,000 mark than that 25,000 mark. Let's be honest.
Yeah, for sure.
I think when I looked up the data, I can't remember, but I want to say like Mississippi was like the lowest amount of money spent on education.
That's not surprising at all.
Mississippi is basically
It's not.
Louisiana with not quite as good of food and slightly worse outcomes on every available metric.
Absolutely. You know, we joke about it a lot, how we're
Yeah.
constantly fighting for the second in line from the last spot
Yeah, yeah. Like
on
Louisiana is like the
everything.
second worst state in America.
Yeah.
And Mississippi gets this free pass, even though they're the worst state. And that's because you can understand people from Mississippi when they speak.
Oh my god. Calling us the fuck out.
I'm just being
Yeah,
honest. Creoles,
no,
Kunas, Cajun people are some hard to understand motherfuckers.
for real though. I mean, my dad is full blood Cajun and he has worked on it because he went to North Louisiana for a while. That's where he met my mom, and North Louisiana is more redneck than Cajun. So
Mm-hmm.
he kind of dissipated the accent, but he'll be on a boat with some dudes who are all Cajun for like a week at a time, and he'll come back and we'll just be like, "Oh, oh, you're saying this shit." Nah, it's difficult to convey how frustrated Louisianans are. We are very much a rich state. We're an oil rich state. We're a refinery rich state. And our state government pays these refineries and these oil hubs to be here, essentially. It
Yeah.
pays
Well, I mean,
Exxon just to be here.
well, the idea being that it's going to bring in labor, but the thing is that all of these places ship in their labor from like the Philippines and like South America, and like so they get all these tax breaks in Louisiana, to you know to be doing all of this great work, whilst they're just destroying the Mississippi Delta and not hiring anybody in the community. It's fucking it's absurd. The tax breaks, like, you know, I mean, like, tax breaks and subsidies are kind of like a 50-50 for the libertarian, because on one hand I like the idea of less taxes. The problem is that when it's not universal, what it really is it's punishing the competition and favoring, you know, the chosen corporations and companies. And so really it's a reward. And so it's not, even though it's like, cool, you took in less tax revenue, that's not really the point, because you didn't get rid of the tax structure that's stealing money from people. You just chose to reward certain players, and it's just another level of corruption.
Exactly. And corruption is the name of the game over here. Like, we're even the people who are from the community and who can get the degree and work in the plant, or can get the really good
Mm-hmm.
offshore drilling job or something like that, they're all dying of cancer because it's fucking oil refineries. Like, we have a place in South Louisiana about a 10-20 mile stretch called Cancer Alley,
Cancer Alley, yeah.
because so many people in that particular area have some form of cancer from the oil refineries. And
Yeah.
it's
And then not
it's
to mention like
almost an
collapsing,
impossible
you know,
Yeah.
underground damage and damage to the delta and the root systems, you know, has caused a lot of like
Oh my god.
water changes that have shifted limestone, and so you just have like random fucking neighborhoods that go into fucking sinkholes, right? And
Sinkholes,
it's and
yeah.
it's yeah, and it's, you know, yeah, and the state is protecting them, right, from what should be, you know, a very easy process of proving that they poisoned people and then suing them out of fucking business, right? Like none of these people should that live in Cancer Alley should you know should have to worry about anything when, you know, like, these companies should be paying restitution for them. But of course, we have the, you know, the benevolent EPA and state institutions that are going to fine them. And oh, by the way, most of those fines are going to go to the government so that they can supposedly trickle down to government programs that are going to help people. And it's absurd.
Yes. Yes, you have an entire section of Louisiana State University that is funded entirely by ExxonMobil. Like, and that's partially because these funds are going to the government. It's also partially because it looks really good for Exxon to be involved with LSU and to have their name on everything. Oh, by the way, all that money goes toward making people into oil refinery factory workers because it's the engineering department. So it's just this big fucking circle of
I mean, I don't have any
labor.
problem with that.
And yeah. By the way,
I mean, like,
I had a question on the judicial system in particular. Like, do
mhm,
you believe in privatizing the judicial system?
absolutely.
Really? How would that work?
So there's a wonderful book by a pacifist and also a libertarian, Robert Murphy, called I think it's called Chaos Theory. I don't remember the subtitle. And it explains how judicial system. It explains a way that judicial systems could work, right? Because the biggest thing about libertarians is we don't necessarily offer prescriptions, right? We simply say certain things are unjustified, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that there is a single libertarian vision of how this will work. But to give an example of how it could work, right, is I live in a community, right? I'm a child, so I'm given as a child from my parent insurance, just like health insurance, known as a rights enforcement agency, right? Now, the rights enforcement agency's job is to protect my private property rights, and to protect my, like, protect me in the event that someone abuses me, steals from me, etc., right? And I contract out with them, And like, if someone steals something from me, right, they contract out a private policing company to, investigate the crime, track down the perpetrators of the crime, etc. Right? Now, let's say someone else is, saying, well, I didn't steal that shit. We got to go to court for this, right? And so what ends up happening is the people that live in the community, they have a competitive market of rights enforcement agencies, just like insurance companies. And when you sign these contracts, they agree that in disputes with other companies, they'll use a third-party arbitration system, an entirely separate company that Nationwide and Geico, for example, agree to arbitrate over the matter. So if Nationwide and Geico can't come to terms, right, and they're both representing their client and they're both saying our client is innocent, or, like Nationwide is saying we did not steal this shit, like we have evidence, we want to go to court, right? Then you go to the third party arbitration, right? And then you go to a private court and you settle it in court. If you are an adult and you move in, or if you are a child and you come of age and you choose to get rid of your insurance agency, well, then you're completely unprotected and you're insane, right? Like, no one is going to want to do business with you because you haven't agreed to any voluntary court system. So no one's going to want to buy anything from you. No one's going to want you on their property. No one's going to want you working for them. Like, a company might require that you have a rights enforcement agency. They may even supply it with the job, right? Just like you do health insurance. Like, it may be like, look, if you want to work here, just like nowadays, like, it's like, do you have reliable transportation, right? It's like, do you have a rights enforcement agency? If you steal from our company, right? Like, are we going to be able to trust that we can have like reduced conflict, right? By the nature that there is like a process that we can go through to ensure that like everything is clean and we don't have to just like, we don't have to resort to any level of force or violence if you become a criminal in some capacity, right? So that's a voluntary way. But a totally normal system, right, under libertarian philosophy, is to go move to a covenant community where they have a judicial system set up. And when you buy property, you agree to, pay 10% of your profits on whatever, and you agree to live under a system very similar to what we have today, right? Or you agree to, maybe it's a religious community and you agree to like the church tribunal, whatever it is the fuck you want. In fact, there's nothing antithetical about a commune that's run very much like a communist area, right? So long as they have borders of their property, right? And they have proper title transfer, you can go live like that, right? Like, we don't tell you what you must do. What we are saying is being forced into a judicial system that I don't agree to, that I can't compete with, and that I can't escape, that tells me that like upholds laws that are authoritarian in nature and imposed upon people, like, I don't know, the war on drugs, right? Or, protecting corporations is unjustifiable.
Yeah. So non-prescriptive, but letting people know that certain things are actively causing the problem that they are attempting to eliminate. It seems it all seems pretty simple, doesn't it?
I mean, if you can make it sound simple, I'm glad I can make it sound simple, because, on a panel or something, you say something like that and people just lose their minds, which is fine. I know that's why I'm there. I have no problem being the bad guy.
Have you liked doing panels since you got started on Twitch?
I enjoy some I find annoying. You never know how the night is going to go. I enjoy challenging the left, and the right as well. I get less opportunities to challenge rightoids though. Mostly because it's like, okay, I'm on a panel and there's like a conservative there that agrees with like 80% of what I'm saying, and then there's a commie. And it's like, what am I going to really dig in on the fucking conservative right now in some minute detail? I do sometimes, and I try and trigger them sometimes for fun. But I find a lot of the debate panels to be more of entertainment, and then sprinkling ideas and concepts that hopefully, take root. Right. Whereas like, when I do my own show and I'm not doing a debate or anything, it's more of like, where we can really get into it and we can really talk about it.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I've kind of stepped away from panels. Like I found it to be a very good tool for growing the channel at first and for letting other people know that I'm just out here doing my thing. But at some point, I think I'm reaching this edge. It becomes almost antithetical to what I do here. Like I'm a pretty I cuss, but I'm a pretty like TOS friendly, we're gonna talk this out and we're not gonna fight each other like blood sports kind of channel. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I go to a panel and I'm screaming at people and interrupting them and doing the entertainment thing, it seems pretty antithetical. And if people do come from that panel, they're not gonna get what they expect.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I'm a little bit more combative on my channel, to be fair. So maybe it's a little bit more representative of my channel. Plus, I do other debates, like Wednesday coming up. I am talking about gatekeeping from earlier. I'm gonna gatekeep the fuck out of that Liberty chick, Kalina. I don't like her. I just don't. She pretends to be a libertarian. She has no idea what libertarianism is, and because she's a gym girl and anti-vax, a bunch of people fell in love with her. But mostly, she's just selling vaccine conspiracy theories, saying that like vaccines cause autism, and is undecided on flat Earth, and a lot of people call her Fed. So I mean that'll be fun. But I'm a combative person. I'm fairly high and fairly low. I mean to say in agreeableness.
I mean, to be fair, like if you if people give you a chance to speak and they're actually listening, I understand that your worldview is pretty consistent. There's not one thing that I can pick apart and say, well, this will change your mind and this will, completely eliminate the problems that you have. And I accept that, and I agree with you to that extent that if everything in your worldview was to consistently happen, then we would probably have a more equitable society. The idea mostly that I come from is that, and Aristippus sort of noted to this in the chat, is that I don't see a really good streamline from the current world we live in into your worldview. That's kind of where I come from on that.
Yeah. So I want to answer that,
We're
but
already
also I want
so
to.
entrenched.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
also
go
want to say
ahead.
something else. Someone said, "Are there any examples from the real world?" Right.
Mhm.
Well, in the real world, the best places to look for examples is the conservative religious communities are almost, with the exception of getting some money from the state and paying taxes, they're basically libertarian covenant communities. There's the Republic of Kospaya from 1440 to 18. Now I can't remember the end date of the Republic of Kospaya, which was a very fairly libertarian, market anarchist, anarcho-individualist, proto-anarchist community. And there are examples of certain things working, like the Iga Sakukuiki, which is where the ninjas come from, hilariously enough, in Japan, where you had household families coming together for mutual contracts and defensive pacts and things of that nature. There are a lot of proto-anarchist things, but is there the anarcho-capitalist heaven? Like, well, no, right? But it's, again, the moral prescription is less so, is more of like an idea of like, here's how things might work. But our philosophy doesn't promulgate a prescription. You could look at general anarchism working, currently in Chiron, Mexico, which has a population of somewhere between 11,000 and 18,000 people. A bunch of abuelas got machetes and drove out illegal logging corporations from their home and created an anarchist community that is anarcho-environmentalist, kind of like anarcho-mutualist, environmentalist, and indigenismo, kind of all mixed together. It's an interesting place. It's really fun to look at. They haven't had a major crime since they became a community. One of the really cool things that they do that is dropped crime to a basically zero is like bad crime is when youths kind of like have like troubled criminal behavior. They take them, they turn them into like junior police to police the forests, which by the way they've planted 3,000 hectares of forestry and changed their economy from cutting down trees into processing tree sap for construction cinder blocks and things like that. So that's part of the anarcho-environmentalist and religious spiritual stuff. But what they'll do is they'll take them, turn them into junior police, and then because they're run by like a council of elders, they bring them before the council of elders and do like therapy sessions and like talk to them like, what's going on with your family? Like the most respected leaders of the entire community sit down with the most troubled youth and like talk out everything. And it's really interesting because it seems to have like basically gotten rid of rape and murder. Like it's just gone.
Wow.
It's really interesting. You should check it out. But I mean, also there's cultural cohesion and they eject people that don't agree with them. So it's like, is it really that, or is it just that they got rid of all the bad apples? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you're a bad apple. Get the fuck out. But yeah, so that in terms of like our philosophy and the fact that, you know, how do we get there? Well, that's kind of the name of the channel, right? The name of the channel is Fabian Liberty, which is stolen from the Fabian Society, which is an organization in England that their coat of arms was literally a wolf in sheep's clothing. They still exist today, and they're part of the Labour Party. And they still host events, which is, you know, we want to bring about full-blown socialism. How do we do that? Well, we do that with a welfare state and regulations slowly, and eventually we'll get full-blown socialism. Seems to be working out in the Western world. So we kind of took the exact opposite approach, right? Which is, you know, reduce the power of the state, you know, keep teaching and promulgating the philosophy. And, you know, so for example, like if I had the power to abolish the FDA tomorrow, would I? Well, it would be the moral decision. It would be justifiable to do so. And the FDA is unjustifiable. So like I would kind of be forced to do it. But how would I advocate getting rid of the FDA? Well, I would rather advocate that people can take any medication that they want, FDA approved or not. And then what happens when you can import drugs from Europe that aren't FDA approved? Well, people want to know that the medication they're taking is safe, and the FDA won't touch it, even though the FDA recalls over 25% of all their medications, so they don't have a very good track record. So what ends up happening is companies pop up, and companies say like what medication's safe and what's not safe, and they give this information to doctors and citizens, so that doctors can prescribe medication that isn't FDA approved. Then what you have is a competitive market where private businesses are competing with what was formerly the state monopoly, which is still a monopoly in a way because it's a majority of the market share. And then what we do is we slowly get rid of funding for the FDA, slowly get rid of power for the FDA, and then one day we get rid of the FDA and nobody notices because companies are doing the job of the FDA. It's in a competitive market. The information's more accurate, and doctors have companies that they trust and companies that they don't trust. And when you go to your doctor, you get a wider range of medication and you get more accurate medication that's better for your health and your happiness. And we stop taking tax money to fund the FDA, and we stop having things like, oh, I don't know, an opioid epidemic because the FDA wanted to help Purdue Pharma, you know, write lies and fraud into their labeling processes. And instead we have something better. You know, like I don't want to just abolish it tomorrow because no one's going to support that. And even if they did, it would probably be a giant shock to the system, and people would reflexively react and beg for the FDA to come back.
Yeah. And this gradual letting of the private market take over these integral systems, it almost seems like it's already happening. I don't know that the government will let it happen if it comes down to it and people just aren't for the government monopoly anymore. But as it seems right now, we already in America have a ton of alternatives to everything kind of except the justice system.
Yeah, but the FDA doesn't give you the freedom, right? And this is why I use the example of the FDA. when we had a baby formula shortage, why did we have a baby formula shortage, right? Oh, that's because one factory was super disgusting and we were totally fucked and there was nothing we could do. And then you look into it and you're like, oh, one factor had a disease found somewhere in the factory and 4 babies died. And you're like, oh my God, that's horrible. I'm so glad the government stepped in to stop us from getting this tainted baby formula. And then we do more investigation. We go, oh, there's zero evidence that that factory actually caused those 4 babies to die. The strain of the bacteria that they had was different than the strain that was in the formula. In 3 out of 4 of those cases, people found strains of that bacteria and tons of others all over the house because these were some horrifically disgusting people. And then, so it's likely that no babies died because of this factory. And then the factory was still shut down for 2 months after they had completely scrubbed it and changed everything. Meanwhile, baby formula from the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe that have less soy in them, less chemicals in them, less aluminum in them, and are better for you and healthier is illegal to buy in the United States of America. You literally cannot legally buy it because the FDA says, well, that's not FDA approved. You're going to kill your baby because for whatever reason, UK baby formula is just killing babies everywhere. But for whatever reason, Anglo-Saxons in the UK seem to be doing just fucking fine. And then what did our government do in order to help with the baby formula shortage? They sent Connaxes to Sweden to buy baby formula, which is illegal in the United States of America because of the FDA, but it was okay this time. Oh, and who did they buy it from? Nestle. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I buy that idea that the market can step in, but not when the government makes it illegal for them to do so. Like, if we would have just had a free market on baby formula, like, we could have just bought European baby formula and had a higher supply, and like, it would have been a non-problem.
Damn. I had no idea about that particular baby formula thing. I'm not a person with babies, so I didn't follow it very closely.
But you remember that, right? Like when the shelves were empty and like the factory was getting permission, but only to make like certain baby formula for like people with allergies. And it's like, is the factory safe or is the factory not safe? Like, why are they only being granted permission to make some baby formula? It was absurd.
Yeah.
Someone said friends, more arsenic in baby formula.
More arsenic in the baby formula. Do it. I think that this has been very productive, and we're gonna have to have another conversation on your channel. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Of course.
And thank you, Scott. This was really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I got to eat dinner and then I'll be live in like an hour. So.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay.
Culture worship. I also want to point out for the record, like I had these notes for myself because you were like, we're talking economics, and I was like, oh God, all right. Well, let me fucking.
Well, then you put in my chat. Economics isn't really my thing, and so I was like, okay, we're gonna pivot. We're gonna pivot around. So I'll have to grill you on economics when I come on your channel.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fine. It's just, yeah, economics isn't my strong suit. But like on a Twitch panel like Prime, the bar is very low. You know what I mean? Like it's like, you know, I mean, like, and I'm not trying to be, you know, too insensitive or insulting. Yeah, I am. Fuck it. Most Twitch politics people are retarded. Yeah, like the bar is really low. Like something can be, you know, one of my weaker positions, and it's still kind of better than most other people. And that's not to say that I'm an amazing genius or anything. It's just to say that like most of the people in Twitch politics are, you know, drama debate bros that don't really know what the fuck they're talking about.
That is a very true thing. I think that when you focus on politics in and of itself and not philosophy and not history and not something else that actually informs politics, you get into this like arena almost of people who just want to be correct by any means possible. Because at the end of the day, if you take away the philosophy and the history and all of these informations from politics, that's what you get. You just get an arena.
Yeah. Also, someone in chat said, bro, come on, can we not with the R slur? Two things. The first thing, just like racists that say I have a black friend, my son's stage 3 autistic. Fuck off. Second, retarded is like one of the nicest things, right? Like, just stop. It's so stupid. We used to call people mentally retarded until we decided we were going to be offended by that. Now we use the term intellectually disabled. But before that, we called them idiots. That was a medical term. Okay. Before that, we called them mongoloids. All right. Like, this idea that like we're going to constantly try and be offended by the new word that is a synonym with stupid, but somehow stupid's okay to say, but retarded is a slur. Like, nobody cares. Deep down, nobody cares except for white Karens that want to be upset about some shit because they feel like they're a goddamn ally.
Oof, the big hot take of the night, my friends.
Like, yeah, I'll say retarded all day long.
Well,
and in fact, I'll use it as an adjective for positive things. Like, that dude's retarded smart.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard it used like that before as well. We will support you in your free speech, you know, being able to oh my god, you just got fucking modded, dude, Casimir. Sorry. Yeah, this free speech intrinsic debate space is all yours to say basically whatever you want as long as Jeff Bezos doesn't take away my check.
Well, I mean, like, look, libertarians don't believe in free speech. We
Really?
do kinda. So long as we have a government, we believe in free speech, but ultimately, like, speech isn't something you own, and it's up to the private property owner to dictate what speech is acceptable. But it's like, yeah, I'm going to fight for free speech when, you know, companies are working in congruence with the state to, you know, censor certain political narratives. You know what I mean? Which we've seen with Twitter files and things like that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But fair enough. I'll get out of here. I got to go eat some dinner and get ready for my stream.
Ain't no thing. Well, we will try and move over to your stream whenever we see it live, and it will be great fun. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
All right. Bye, friend.
Peace. You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.